9:18 a.m. Riverside Union Medical Center. Trauma nurse Sarah Mitchell stands in the director's office, still wearing gloves stained with a Delta Force general's blood. "You're done here," the director says sharply. "No authorization, no protocol. You crossed the line." Sarah doesn't argue. She just says quietly, "He wasn't crashing. He was poisoned and none of you saw it. Turn in your badge." He snaps before I call security. Sarah walks into the hallway. Colleagues look away. One whispers, "She's a nurse, not a doctor. She overstepped." But 11 minutes later, the windows start to vibrate. Not violently, just enough to make everyone stop talking. A receptionist looks up. "Is that a helicopter?" Staff rush to the stairwell leading to the roof. A Navy helicopter drops onto the landing pad, dust whipping across the concrete. Before the rotors even slow, uniformed personnel spill out, scanning every face. One of them shouts, "We need Sarah Mitchell." The entire hospital freezes. The director turns pale because only now do they realize, Nate, they didn't fire a nurse. They fired the only combat medic in the building. Before we begin, take 1 second to comment, "I'm watching," and hit subscribe. It tells the algorithm you want more stories about the heroes nobody sees coming. The trauma bay doors slammed open just after 9 a.m. And the entire R seemed to shift. Texts rushed forward. Nurses scrambled to clear a path. And the paramedics pushing the stretcher looked like men who'd been holding their breath for miles. The man on the bed wasn't just any patient. He was wearing a dark blue blazer with medals, a service pin glinting near the collar, and a look on his face that said he'd stared death down before. But this time, death was winning. Sarah Mitchell saw it the second the stretcher rolled past. Not just the grayish tint along his jawline, not just the cold sweat on his brow, but the way his fingers were curled unnaturally tight, like the nerves didn't trust the muscles anymore. She stepped closer, brushing a hand over his forearm, ignoring the raised eyebrows from the physicians crowding around him. "Male, mid-60s, one paramedic shouted. "Collapsed in transport, heart rate unstable, GCS dropping fast. He's going into cardiac failure," a doctor barked. "No," Sarah muttered, eyes narrowing. "He's not. No one hurt her. Or maybe they did and decided a nurse should stay in her lane." Either way, she kept moving. While the cardio team argued about atropine doses and oxygen collapse, Sarah lifted the general's eyelid with her thumb. The pupil snapped tight under the light. Too fast, too strong. Not a cardiac sign, a neurotoxic one. The room buzzed with orders, monitors, alarms, but Sarah heard none of it. She saw only the faint purple shadowing along the general's nail beds, the odd stiffness in his jaw, the shallow, uneven breaths that didn't match the heart pattern at all. She had seen this before in a place no civilian hospital ever trained for. Her stomach twisted. "No, it can't be," she whispered. "Step back, Mitchell." Myers snapped, elbowing her aside. "Let us handle this. He needs AP. He needs an antidote," she said. Myers froze. The attending physician turned sharply. "What did you say?" Sarah didn't have time to argue. She moved past him, ripping open the emergency talks tray, her fingers flying across the labels until she found the vial, something most doctors here had never even used. "Mitchell," Myers roared, "you're out of line." But Sarah didn't hear him anymore. She injected the antidote into the general's arm, her pulse hammering as she whispered, "Come on, don't make me relive this." The room erupted behind her. "You could kill him. You're not authorized. What the hell is she doing?" But Sarah stayed by the bedside, watching the monitor, counting down in her head like she had done a dozen times before on the other side of the world. 1 second. 2, 3. The monitor flatlined for a full heartbeat, then spiked. A pulse hit the screen, weak but real. Gasps rippled through the room. Then the general's eyes snapped open. He inhaled sharply, chest jerking, fingers twitching toward her hand. When his gaze found hers, it landed with a force that made her step back. Recognition, fear, relief, all at once. His voice cracked, barely audible. "You weren't supposed to survive." She froze. Every sound in the ER seemed to dissolve. A doctor paused mid-step. A nurse dropped her pen. Myers stood stiff with shock. Sarah leaned closer, breath catching. "Sir, what are you talking about? You need to stay still." "Your team," he rasped. "Echo team. They said you died in that blast." Her throat tightened painfully. Her vision flickered with the ghosts of sand, fire, screaming radios, and the outpost collapsing around her. But she forced a straight face. "Please," she whispered. "Don't talk. You need Mitchell." The word cut like a blade. Director Kane stood at the bay entrance, face cold as stone. "Office now." Sarah stepped back from the general, heart pounding in her ears as she followed Kane down the hall. The director's office door slammed behind them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Kane snapped, voice vibrating with fury. "You do not ever administer medication without a physician's approval." "He was poisoned," Sarah said calmly. "You're a nurse," he shot back. "Not a toxicologist, not a doctor, not military command." Sarah's jaw tightened. "He would have died. He almost did because of you." Kane snapped. "You're terminated." Sarah's hands went still at her sides. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply pulled her badge from her scrub pocket and set it on the desk. "He wasn't crashing," she said quietly. "He was hit with a neurotoxin. The same signature compound that killed." Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard. "That killed people I knew." "Get out," Kane said before I call security. Sarah left without another word. In the hallway, heads turned. Conversations abruptly stopped. A few nurses glanced down at their clipboards. One doctor muttered, "She's always thought she was more than a nurse." But as Sarah walked toward the exit, her hands trembled. Not from the firing, but from the chilling realization forming in her mind. That toxin, that exact neurotoxin. Only one group had ever used it. Her team. The team she lost in the outpost explosion. The team she was told never existed. She reached the revolving doors at the front of the hospital and stopped. The ground shook under her feet. A light vibration at first, like machinery, then a deeper tremor that rattled the windows. Shouts echoed from the lobby. "Is that a helicopter on the roof? Why would, oh my God, those are Navy markings." Sarah didn't move. Couldn't move. Her heartbeat slammed in her chest as the tremors intensified. The entire hospital vibrating under the force of rotor blades whipping the air above. People rushed past her toward the stairwell leading to the roof. Security guards ran. Residents scrambled. Doctors pushed forward with confusion on their faces. Sarah stood in the doorway, breath held tight as a paramedic shouted from the hallway, "They're asking for someone." He squinted at a clipboard. Someone named him Sarah Mitchell. Her blood turned cold. Footsteps thundered across the ceiling. Shouts rose above the building. Wind blasted down the stairwell as the helicopter's rotors whipped the air through the vents. A voice boomed from the roof, echoing through every floor of the hospital. "We need Sarah Mitchell immediately. The general identified the toxin, and he won't survive without her." The entire hospital fell silent. Every doctor, every nurse, every staff member who looked away from her in the hallway, even Director Kane. Sarah slowly turned toward the ceiling, heart pounding like a war drum, because she knew something no one else in that building understood. If the Navy was here, landing on a civilian hospital, asking for her, then this wasn't about saving a general. It meant the people who poisoned him were already inside the hospital. For a few seconds, Sarah Mitchell didn't move. The entire hospital seemed to pulse under the weight of that voice echoing from the roof, each syllable shaking the air like a distant explosion. Staff rushed around her, but it all felt strangely muffled, as if she were underwater. She shouldn't have been here. She shouldn't have touched that antidote. She shouldn't have heard the general say her name. And she definitely shouldn't have the Navy descending onto a civilian hospital asking for her. But they were here. A uniformed officer barreled down the stairwell, boots thewing against the metal steps. He scanned the lobby, then locked eyes on her instantly, like he had been briefed with her face. "You, Sarah Mitchell," he barked. She didn't nod, didn't speak. She just stood still as he approached, breath caught somewhere between her throat and her chest. "Come with me," he said. Director Kane rushed forward, face flushed and jaw clenched. "Officer, she's been terminated. She is no longer permitted to interact with." The officer stepped closer, chest rising with irritation. "With respect, sir, I'm not here to ask." The general woke up asking for her by name. "We have orders to bring her to him. You can't just override hospital protocol." The officer turned cold. When a decorated Delta Force general gives a direct request, protocol is not your concern. His survival is. A hush settled over the lobby. Kane's face drained of color, and without another word, he stepped aside. Sarah followed the officer, her pulse thrumming in her ears as they climbed the stairwell to the roof. Each step felt heavier than the last, memories clawing at the edges of her mind. Sand, gunfire, smoke, the blast that tore Echo Team apart. She had buried all of that years ago, buried herself with it. And yet here, she was about to walk into the arms of the same world that tried to kill her. The rooftop door slammed open, and the wind hit her like a wave. The helicopter's rotors spun down, casting violent gusts across the landing pad. Navy personnel stood in tight formation, scanning every corner of the roof as if expecting an ambush. The commander briefed her quickly as they moved. The second victim was a communications officer assigned to escort the general. He collapsed inside the ICU right under our noses. His tone darkened. This wasn't sloppy. It was precise. Sarah inhaled sharply. Then it's someone trained. Exactly, he said. And that terrifies me. As the elevator doors opened, the ICU corridor shimmered under flickering lights. Nurses huddled behind the station desk, whispering anxiously. 2 guards stood outside room 14, their hands hovering near their holsters. He's inside, one guard said, still unresponsive. Sarah pushed into the room and her breath caught. The comms officer lay pale and limp, the same purplish tint creeping up his throat. Cold sweat rolled down his temples. His lips had already taken on that faint cyanotic hue that made her stomach twist. She approached the bedside, fingers trembling as she examined the 4-line. The bag looked normal. Too normal. What's wrong? The commander asked. Who hung this for? She whispered. A nurse behind her stuttered. I think it was Jessica from night shift. Jessica doesn't work days, Sarah said. Everyone froze. Her gaze slid to the floor. A single drop of clear fluid clung to the tile under the 4-pole, reflecting the overhead light with an oily sheen only visible if you knew to look for it. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. The poisoner used the ICU. The room snapped into motion. The commander ordered the guards to lock down the wing, but Sarah barely heard him. Her eyes traced the tiny trail of droplets leading out the door down the hall toward the east wing. The path ended abruptly at a utility closet. She stepped closer. There, just above the handle, a faint smear of residue caught the light. Chemical, gritty, unmistakable. Her breath shuddered. This was the same compound Echo Team encountered the day the outpost fell. The same compound she had thought destroyed. Her pulse raced. This isn't just an attack. This is a message. What kind of message? A purge, she whispered. They're eliminating anyone who touched the original files. Anyone who knew the truth. Before he could respond, an overhead alarm blared, drowning out everything else. Code red. Unauthorized breach in pharmacology. Repeat, code red. Sarah and the commander exchanged a single look. Then they ran down the ICU corridor, past terrified nurses, the building vibrating with panic. Each step echoed like gunfire. Each turn pulled them deeper into a maze of flickering lights and tightening shadows. They rounded the corner into the pharmacology wing, and Sarah stopped dead. The door to the controlled substances room was wide open. Lights flickering, cart overturned, vials smashed across the floor like someone had swept their arm across an entire shelf. But worse was the figure caught on the security feet above the door. A person in scrubs, face masked, moving with precision, with confidence, like someone trained. The commander stared at the screen. Is that Sarah's blood turned to ice? I know that walk, she whispered. I know that stance. Her heart thundered in her ears. It can't be. The masked figure turned their head just enough for the camera to catch the angle of their jaw. The way they held the tray, the way their foot pivoted before stepping out of frame. Sarah's knees nearly buckled because she'd seen that exact movement every day for years on someone she buried. Someone Echo Team mourned. Someone who died in the blast that should have killed her too. Someone who couldn't possibly be alive. But the grainy screen didn't care about what was possible. It only showed the truth. The poisoner was a member of Echo Team alive here inside this hospital and hunting her. Sarah stared at the security feed as if the screen itself had turned into a ghost. The masked figure on the monitor moved with a rhythm she knew by muscle memory. A rhythm forged in sand, smoke, and survival. The slight tilt of the head before entering a room. The exact foot pivot before stepping out of frame. The relaxed shoulders even under pressure. All movements Echo Team practiced until they were identical, familiar, unmistakable. But this was impossible. She felt the commander step closer behind her. Do you recognize them? Her throat tightened. I need to see the footage again. He rewound it. The figure slipped into the pharmacology room, confident, efficient, never hesitating. They didn't search. They knew exactly where every vial was stored. They moved like someone who had studied this hospital, someone who'd been inside before, someone with access, someone trained. The commander's voice softened. Sarah, if you know who this is. She didn't let him finish. They died. They all died. I watched. Her voice cracked. Memories forcing their way back, like shrapnel. Sand whipping in the wind. A radio screaming. A blast that tore the outpost apart. Bodies thrown like ragdolls. Her own breath knocked out of her as she was buried under the debris. For years, she had believed she was the only one who crawled out alive. But now the screen flickered again. The masked figure turned just enough to show the shape of their jaw beneath the surgical mask, and the truth hit her with the weight of a collapsing roof. It wasn't just anyone from Echo Team. It was someone she trusted, someone she fought beside, someone who saved her life more than once. Her whole body trembled with adrenaline. Blake, you don't have to do this. Oh, he said softly. But I do. A faint sound broke the tension. A whisper of movement. The commander and his guards weren't waiting anymore. They were entering the hallway. Quiet, slow, but not quiet enough. Blake's head snapped toward the door. His grip tightened, and in one swift motion, he hurled the vial toward the floor. Sarah screamed, no? But Blake was faster. Her hand shot out. Fingers grazed the vial midair. Glass shifted direction, hit the wall, shattered. A cloud of toxin burst outward. Sarah grabbed the edge of the curtain and threw it over the spill just in time, sealing the vapor beneath fabric. The air purifier roared, sucking fumes toward its filter. Blake didn't stay to see the outcome. He jumped through the adjoining door, evacuation exit, and vanished into the stairwell. The commander rushed in seconds later. Sarah, are you? She didn't let him finish. He's heading for the lower levels, she gasped. He's going to release the toxin into the ventilation system. The commander froze. That would kill half the hospital, he whispered. Sarah grabbed his arm, eyes burning with fear and fury. No, she said. That will kill everyone. She pushed past him toward the stairwell. The chase wasn't optional now. Blake wasn't just a ghost. He was the executioner, and the entire hospital was seconds away from becoming a graveyard. Sarah bolted down the stairwell, boots slamming against metal steps as alarms wailed through the hospital like distant screams. Each floor blurred past fourth, third, second, her breath sharp and controlled. Muscles burning with adrenaline she hadn't felt since the desert. The commander and his guards thundered behind her, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. If Blake reached the lower levels, he could access the central ventilation shut off. A single vial of that toxin pumped through the ducts would drop patients, nurses, doctors, everyone within minutes. Blake, she shouted into the echoing stairwell. Don't do this. Her voice bounced off concrete, hollow and unanswered. When she burst into the basement corridor, the air changed instantly. Colder, thicker, humming with the low vibration of industrial systems. Fluorescent lights flickered in long rows above her, painting the hallway in sharp white and deep shadow. Then she saw him. At the far end of the corridor, Blake stood in front of a steel service door marked Restricted Access Ventilation Control. One hand hovered over the keypad. The other held a canister, larger than the vials he'd been using. Industrial grade. Enough toxin to poison the entire building in under 90 seconds. He didn't turn around when she called his name again. His shoulders lifted in a slow laugh. Quiet, bitter, broken. You keep saying that like any of this was my choice, he said, voice echoing in the cold hallway. Like any of us ever had a choice. Sarah stepped forward carefully, her pulse hammering. What did they do to you? Blake finally turned. Even with the mask on, she could see it in his eyes. The thing that replaced the man she once trusted. Pain, betrayal, and something worse. Conviction. The burn of someone who believed he was right. They turned us into ghosts, he said. They erased us, Sarah. Echo Team blew the whistle on a covert toxin program. Do you remember? Of course you don't. They wiped the files clean. They wiped us clean. Sarah's breath caught. A memory flickered. Papers burning. Hard drives smashed. Blake shouting into a radio that no one answered. You survived? She whispered. He nodded slowly, barely. And do you know what they told me afterward? That the explosion was convenient. His voice shook with fury. Our deaths tied up the loose ends until you woke up in that rubble. Her chest tightened as the truth settled over her like a weight she couldn't breathe under. You think killing civilians will fix that? She said softly. They aren't civilians, Blake snapped. Not to the people who did this. They're witnesses. They patched up the general. They saw the symptoms. They saw you. He pointed the canister at her. You're the biggest threat of all. Sarah's voice broke. You were my family. He paused. That one sentence hit him. She could see it. The slight tremor in his hand. The flicker in his eyes as the mission and their memories collided. But the moment didn't last. He studied the canister. Family doesn't survive in the shadows, Sarah. Only killers do. Sarah stepped forward, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Then kill me. But don't touch them. Blake hesitated. And that was all she needed. Sarah lunged. Blake reacted instantly, swinging the canister. It clipped her shoulder, sending her crashing into the wall. Pain exploded down her arm, but she rolled with it, grabbing his wrist and twisting. He grunted, slamming her back into the steel door so hard the impact rattled her teeth. You always were the fighter, he growled. Sarah shoved her knee into his ribs, and the canister slipped from his grasp, clattering across the floor. They both dove for it, hands brushing metal just before Blake kicked her side, sending her sprawling. He grabbed the canister again and sprinted toward the keypad. The commander and guards burst into the corridor. But Blake spun, hurling a flash canister from his pocket. It detonated with blinding white fury. Everyone reeled. Everyone except Sarah. She had trained for this. Through the fading blast, she lunged again, body slamming into Blake. They crashed to the floor, grappling for control, his hands clawing for the canister valve. Sarah's fingers caught his wrist, twisting until something cracked. Blake screamed. The canister rolled free again. This time, Sarah pounced, ripping the valve housing clean off and smashing it against the concrete. The toxin container hissed softly for a moment, then went silent, disabled, useless. Blake stared at her, chest heaving, rage dissolving into something hollow. You think you saved them? He said bitterly. You just signed your death sentence. He reached for a scalpel he'd hidden in his sleeve. Sarah didn't hesitate. She struck his forearm, twisting, disarming him with a single practiced move she'd learned from him years ago. The blade skittered across the floor. Blake collapsed to his knees, breath ragged. For Echo Team, he whispered. Sarah's voice cracked. Echo Team died trying to save people, not kill them. His eyes softened for the first time. Maybe that's why we lost. She tightened her grip on his arm. No, that's why we mattered. Before Blake could answer, the commander finally regained his footing, signaling his guards, who swarmed in and pinned Blake to the ground. He didn't resist. Not anymore. Sarah backed away, chest heaving, tears burning her eyes. Her world felt like it was collapsing again. Blake alive. Blake broken. Blake trying to finish a mission that was never theirs. But now, she could finally end it. They brought her back to the ICU afterward. The comms officer was stable. The general's vitals were stronger. The toxin didn't reach the ventilation system. Families were safe. Nurses were alive. And the hospital hadn't turned into another graveyard. When the general saw Sarah in the doorway, he lifted a trembling hand. You stopped him, he whispered. No, I stopped myself from becoming him. The general nodded, eyes heavy with respect. Echo Team would be proud. Her throat closed around a breath she couldn't release. The Navy commander approached. Ma'am, the Pentagon wants to debrief you. Your original file, has been reopened. Sarah stared at the floor. That door, that shadow she left behind in the desert. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to bury it all again. But the biggest part of her, the part that saved people even when it cost her everything, knew the truth. If she didn't show up to that debrief, someone else would finish what Blake started. She lifted her gaze. Tell them I'll come. The commander nodded. We lift off in 10. She walked toward the elevator. Past nurses who stared at her like she was something mythic. Past doctors who suddenly understood the woman they had dismissed. Past Director Kane, who looked like he wanted to apologize, but couldn't find the words. Sarah didn't slow. She stepped onto the roof as sunrise broke over the city, painting the helicopter in gold. For the first time in years, the world felt quiet. Her choice waited on the horizon. She took a breath. Then she stepped toward the helicopter. If this story made you feel something, anything, then please subscribe. These stories take time, heart, and everything I have to bring to life. Your subscription tells me you want more." The helicopter lifted off from the hospital roof as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah Mitchell sat in the jump seat, hands folded in her lap, watching the city shrink beneath them. The rhythmic thrum of rotor blades should have been comforting. Instead, it carried her back to another helicopter, another mission, another life she thought she'd buried in the desert sand. The Navy commander across from her studied a tablet, his face grim in the artificial light. "Ma'am," he said without looking up, "what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this aircraft. The Pentagon debrief isn't just about Blake or Echo Team. It's about something much bigger." Sarah's stomach tightened. How much bigger? The commander finally met her eyes. "We've identified 17 other hospital incidents across 6 states in the past 8 months, all involving former military personnel, all using the same neurotoxin compound, all targeting people who had contact with classified programs that were supposedly terminated years ago." The words hit her like a physical blow. 17 hospitals. How many people died? The commander's voice dropped. 237. Patients, doctors, nurses, security guards. Anyone who might have seen something, heard something, remembered something they shouldn't. Sarah's hands trembled. Blake wasn't working alone. No, the commander said. He was part of a network. Former operators from disbanded units who were told they died in training accidents, combat operations, equipment failures. Black budget programs that got scrubbed from the records when they became politically inconvenient. These operators were kept alive, hidden, and turned into cleanup crews. Sarah felt the helicopter bank sharply as they approached Washington. Below, the Potomac River caught the morning light like a ribbon of molten copper. The Washington Monument rose in the distance, stark and white against the awakening sky. But all she could see were faces. Her teammates from Echo Team. The general's terrified eyes. Blake's hollow stare as he collapsed in that basement corridor. The commander leaned forward. "Sarah, you need to understand. What happened at your hospital wasn't random. You weren't just in the wrong place at the right time. You were targeted. That general wasn't poisoned by accident. He was bait." Her breath caught. "Bait for what?" "For you," the commander said quietly. "Someone wanted to draw you out. Someone who knew exactly who you were and what you'd do when faced with that specific toxin signature. Someone who's been tracking you for years, waiting for the right moment to bring you back into the fold." The helicopter descended toward a military airfield outside the Capitol. Rows of unmarked aircraft sat on the tarmac like sleeping predators. Sarah watched them grow larger through the window, her mind racing. "If I was the target," she said slowly, then Blake knew. Blake was told to fail, she realized. He was supposed to get caught. He was supposed to lead you to me. The commander nodded grimly. "The question is why? What do they want with a trauma nurse who's been out of the game for 5 years?" The helicopter touched down with a soft bump. Through the window, Sarah saw black SUVs waiting, their engines already running. Men in dark suits stood beside them, faces hidden behind sunglasses despite the early hour. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. 2 exits from the helicopter. For vehicles. At least 8 personnel visible, probably twice that many she couldn't see. Overlapping fields of fire. Professional setup. Military precision. This wasn't a debrief. This was an extraction. "Ma'am," the commander said, reaching for his sidearm. "I think we have a problem." The men outside weren't moving like Pentagon security. They moved like operators. Like ghosts. Like the same people who had turned Blake into a weapon and aimed him at everything she cared about. Sarah's hand found the emergency door release. "Commander," she said quietly, "when I give the signal, you and your men go out the port side. Fast and low. Stay together. Move toward the tower building. Don't look back." The commander's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'm going to find out who's been pulling the strings," Sarah said. "And I'm going to end this." Before he could protest, she yanked the door release and rolled out into the morning air. The tarmac was cold beneath her feet as she sprinted toward the nearest hangar, automatic weapons fire erupting behind her. The sound of bullets whining overhead was hauntingly familiar. Sand, smoke, screaming radios. The same chaos that had supposedly killed her team 5 years ago. But this time, she wasn't running blind. This time, she knew someone wanted her alive. The hangar door was already open, waiting for her. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows. crates stacked to the ceiling, equipment covered by tarps. And at the far end, a figure in military fatigues standing perfectly still, waiting. Sarah approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The figure turned, and her world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just another ghost from Echo Team. It was someone she'd trusted more than her own family. Someone who'd held her hand as she lay bleeding in the rubble of that outpost. Someone who'd promised to come back for her. Colonel James Hartford, her former commanding officer. The man who'd sent Echo Team on their final mission. The man who'd attended her memorial service after telling the world she was dead. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Her voice came out as a whisper. "You son of a bitch. You've been behind this the whole time." Colonel Hartford stepped closer, and she could see the weight of years in his face. The lines around his eyes. The silver threading through his hair. But his stance was still military perfect. Still the man who'd trained her to kill with her bare hands. "Not behind it," he said. "Trapped by it. Just like you. Just like Blake. Just like everyone else who got too close to the truth." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her waist, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. What truth? The truth about why Echo Team was really sent to that outpost, Hartford said. The truth about what you found there. The truth about why certain people in very high places needed you all to disappear. Sarah's memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. The mission briefing. The desert compound they were supposed to investigate. The laboratory hidden underground. The documents they'd photographed. The evidence of human experimentation using the same neurotoxins that had nearly killed the general. "We found the test site," she whispered. "We found where they were developing those compounds on prisoners. On our own soldiers." Hartford nodded slowly. "You found Project Lazarus, a black-budget program that was using military personnel as test subjects for chemical weapons research. Soldiers who were listed as Kia, but were actually being held in secret facilities and used for human experimentation." Sarah felt sick. The outpost explosion. It wasn't enemy action. "We were going to expose them," Hartford said. "All of us. You, me, Echo Team, a dozen other units who'd stumbled onto pieces of the program. But someone leaked our plans. Someone high enough in the chain of command to know our every move. The bomb that destroyed the outpost wasn't placed by insurgents. It was placed by our own people. To tie up loose ends. To eliminate witnesses." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "You let them think I was dead." "I had to," Hartford said, his voice breaking slightly. "It was the only way to keep you safe. The only way to give you a chance at a normal life. But they never stopped looking, Sarah. They never stopped hunting for survivors. And when that general walked into your emergency room with Lazarus toxin in his system, they knew exactly where to find you." The sound of helicopters approaching filled the hangar. Multiple aircraft, closing fast. Hartford pulled a pistol from his holster and handed it to her grip first. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Project Lazarus isn't over. It's bigger now. International. They're not just experimenting on soldiers anymore. They're targeting civilian populations. Testing crowd control agents in major cities. Developing weapons that can eliminate entire populations without leaving evidence of chemical warfare. The hospital incidents were just the beginning." Sarah took the weapon, muscle memory guiding her hands as she checked the chamber in safety. "How do we stop them?" Hartford smiled grimly. "We don't stop them. We expose them. Every black site. Every test facility. Every government official who signed off on using American soldiers as guinea pigs. I've been gathering evidence for 5 years. Documents, recordings, witness testimonies. Everything we need to bring down the entire network. But I needed someone I could trust to help get it to the right people. Someone with the skills to survive what's coming." The helicopters were directly overhead now, their rotors creating a deafening roar in the hangar. Ropes dropped from the open doors. Figures in black tactical gear began fast roping down. Sarah and Hartford moved deeper into the hangar, using the crates for cover. "How many?" she called over the noise. "Too many," he replied, pulling out a tablet and pressing a series of commands. "But I've been preparing for this day for a long time." Explosions rocked the airfield outside. Smoke billowed past the hangar doors. In the distance, emergency sirens began wailing. Sarah looked at Hartford in shock. "You just declared war on the Pentagon." "No," he said grimly. "I just declared war on the people who've been using the Pentagon's resources to commit crimes against humanity. There's a difference. The tactical team was moving through the hangar now, weapons raised, searching methodically. Professional. Disciplined. These weren't regular military. These were Lazarus operators. The same program that had turned Blake into a weapon. Sarah counted muzzle flashes, estimated distances, calculated angles of fire. Her combat training flowed back like she'd never left the field. She looked at Hartford. What's the extraction plan? He handed her the tablet. Everything's on here. Upload it to the secure server I've marked. The access codes are embedded in the device. Once it's transmitted, every major news outlet and congressional oversight committee will receive copies simultaneously. Too many to suppress. Too public to ignore. Sarah took the tablet, understanding flooding through her. You're not coming with me. Hartford shook his head. Someone needs to buy you time. Someone needs to make sure they don't follow you out of here. Besides, I'm tired of running. I'm tired of watching good soldiers die for the ambitions of cowards who never wore the uniform. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. Colonel. He cut her off. That's an order, soldier. Complete the mission. Honor the fallen. Make their sacrifice mean something. The tactical team was getting closer. Sarah could hear their communications, their coordinated movements. In 30 seconds, they'd round the corner and have clear sight lines to their position. She gripped Hartford's shoulder. Echo Team would be proud. He smiled one last time. Now go. Make them pay. Sarah sprinted toward the rear of the hangar as gunfire erupted behind her. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back. The emergency exit led to a service tunnel that connected to the main terminal building. Her footsteps echoed in the concrete passage as she ran, the tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. Behind her, the sounds of battle faded into the distance. Above her, she could hear jets scrambling. The entire base was going into lockdown. But Hartford had planned for this. At the end of the tunnel, a maintenance uniform waited on a hook. False identification papers. Cash. A key to a civilian vehicle parked in the employee lot. Sarah changed quickly, pulling her hair back and donning safety glasses. Just another airport worker heading to an early shift. The employee lot was chaos. Security vehicles racing toward the airfield. Personnel evacuating the terminal. Emergency broadcasts on every radio channel. Sarah found the designated car, a nondescript sedan with civilian plates. The engine turned over on the first try. As she drove toward the airport perimeter, her hands steady on the wheel despite everything, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself one moment of grief. For Hartford. For Blake. For Echo Team. For every soldier who'd been betrayed by the people they'd sworn to protect. Then she focused on the road ahead. She had a mission to complete. A story to tell. A reckoning to deliver. The tablet on the passenger seat contained enough evidence to topple governments and send dozens of high-ranking officials to prison. Project Lazarus was about to become headline news around the world. Sarah Mitchell drove toward the dawn, toward justice, toward the end of 5 years of lies and silence. Behind her, smoke rose from the airfield like a funeral pyre for all the ghosts who could finally rest. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since that day in the desert, Sarah knew they could win it. If this story made you feel something, anything, then please subscribe. The Pentagon helicopter touched down on the military base landing pad 47 minutes after leaving Riverside Union Medical Center. Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the tarmac, her hospital scrubs replaced by borrowed fatigues that felt foreign against her skin. The weight of what had transpired at the hospital pressed against her chest like a stone. Blake was alive. Her team was compromised. And somewhere in the shadows of government bureaucracy, people who had orchestrated Echo Team's supposed death were still pulling strings. The commander led her through a maze of concrete corridors, past armed guards who watched her with curious eyes. They knew something significant was happening, but protocol kept their questions locked behind neutral expressions. Each step echoed like a countdown toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The briefing room door opened to reveal a conference table surrounded by men and women in dress uniforms. Medals caught the fluorescent light, casting tiny rainbows across their chests. At the head of the table sat a woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much classified information. General Patricia Lawson, according to the nameplate before her. Sarah took the indicated seat, hands folded carefully in her lap. The general's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Mitchell, your file makes for interesting reading. Officially, you died in an IED explosion in Syria 3 years ago. Echo Team was wiped out. Mission classified. Record sealed. Sarah's throat tightened. That's what I was told. Lawson leaned forward. What you weren't told is that Echo Team stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. A joint operation between defense contractors and certain elements within our own intelligence apparatus. Biological weapons development. Toxins designed to mimic natural causes of death. Sarah's blood turned cold. The compound that killed the general, she whispered, was one of yours. Not ours, Lawson said sharply. Theirs. A rogue faction that was supposed to be shut down after your team filed their report. Instead, they eliminated the witnesses and continued their work. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Blake said you told him our deaths were convenient. Lawson's face hardened. Blake Dalton was recruited by the same people who tried to kill him. They offered him a choice. Work for them, or watch them finish what they started with the rest of his team. The rest of his team. Sarah's voice cracked. How many others are alive? We've identified at least 6 members of Echo Team operating under deep cover identities. They're being used as assets for off-the-books operations. Assassinations disguised as accidents. Political figures dying of sudden heart attacks. Journalists suffering mysterious illnesses. The room spun around Sarah as the implications crashed over her. You're telling me my friends, my family, are being used as killers? Lawson nodded grimly. And now that Blake has been captured, they'll know their operation has been compromised. They'll either extract the remaining assets or eliminate them to protect their secrets. Sarah stood abruptly, chair scraping against linoleum. I need to find them. It's not that simple, Lawson said. We don't know their current identities or locations. The organization behind this has resources that rival our own. Government contracts, private funding, political protection at the highest levels. Then how do we stop them? We use the one advantage we have, Lawson replied. They think you're working alone. They don't know we've identified the broader conspiracy. They'll make a move to eliminate you, and when they do, we'll be ready. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. You want to use me as bait. Lawson's expression didn't change. We want to give you the chance to save your team. A folder slid across the table towards Sarah. Inside were photographs, documents, surveillance reports. The faces of her former teammates stared back at her, but they were different now. Hollow eyes, sharp cheekbones, the weight of forced survival etched into their features. Marcus Chun, her former squad leader, now operating under the identity of Dr. Michael Chong at a research facility in Virginia. Elena Vasquez, the team's communications specialist, working as a nurse practitioner in Seattle under the name Linda Vale. David Park, their demolitions expert, employed as a maintenance supervisor at a federal building in Denver, using the name Daniel Pierce. Each photograph felt like a punch to her chest. These were people she had mourned, people she had carried in her heart like ghosts. And they were alive, trapped in the same nightmare that had consumed Blake. How long have you known? Sarah's voice was barely audible. We suspected for months, Lawson admitted. But we needed confirmation. Your encounter with Blake provided that. Sarah's anger flared. You could have told me. You could have prevented what happened at the hospital. Could we? Lawson challenged. If we had approached you directly, would you have believed us? Or would you have thought it was another conspiracy, another betrayal? The general's words hit their mark. Sarah knew she would have run, would have disappeared rather than trust anyone claiming to represent the government that had abandoned her team. The silence stretched between them until Sarah finally spoke. What's the plan? Lawson activated a screen on the wall behind her. Satellite images appeared, showing a compound nestled in the Virginia mountains. This facility is registered as a private medical research center, but our intelligence suggests it's the primary training and conditioning site for the rogue program. Your former teammates are likely held there when they're not on active missions. The plan is complex but necessary, Lawson continued. We'll insert you into the facility under the pretense that you've been captured. You'll make contact with the other Echo Team members and gather intelligence on the operation's structure and leadership. Once we have that information, we can coordinate a simultaneous extraction and strike operation. Sarah studied the compound images. How do I know this isn't another setup? How do I know you're not part of the same organization that killed my team? Lawson was quiet for a long moment. You don't, she finally admitted. Trust is a luxury none of us can afford in this situation. But consider this. Sarah Mitchell died 3 years ago in a Syrian desert. The woman sitting in this room has nothing left to lose and everything to gain by bringing down the people responsible for that death. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. The fear, the uncertainty, the grief that had carried her through 3 years of civilian life. It was crystallizing into something harder, more focused. Purpose. When do we start? Lawson smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Transport leaves in 6 hours. But first, you need to disappear. Sarah Mitchell, trauma nurse, must die as completely as Eva Weston, combat medic, did 3 years ago. The transformation took place in a sterile room 3 floors below the Pentagon. Hair dyed black, cut short and sharp. Colored contacts turned her brown eyes green. Temporary tattoos added scars that told stories of captivity and interrogation. When Sarah looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger. Someone who had been broken and rebuilt, who carried secrets that weighed more than muscle and bone. The new identity came with documentation that would fool most background checks. Elena Reeves, former military contractor, captured during a Black Ops mission in Eastern Europe. The kind of person the rogue organization would want to recruit or eliminate. The kind of person who would know things worth extracting. As the helicopter lifted off from the Pentagon landing pad, Sarah watched the city lights fade beneath her. Somewhere below, Director Kane was probably filling out incident reports about the nurse who had saved a general and then vanished into the night. Somewhere below, the general was recovering, unaware that his survival had triggered a chain of events that would either save or doom the people who had already died for him once. The facility appeared in the distance like a cluster of stars against the dark mountain landscape. Sarah's earpiece crackled with the commander's voice. Remember, you're a broken asset looking for shelter. Let them think they're recruiting you. Don't try to be a hero until we have all the pieces in place. Sarah touched the small transmitter hidden beneath her skin, the only link back to the outside world. She thought about Blake, confined in a military prison, probably unaware that his capture had started something larger than either of them had imagined. She thought about her teammates, trapped in identities they hadn't chosen, living lives that weren't their own. The helicopter began its descent toward the compound. Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes and opened them as Elena Reeves, the woman who would either save Echo Team or die trying to bring them home. The landing was rough, deliberate. Guards surrounded the helicopter before the rotors stopped spinning, weapons drawn but not aimed. They moved with military precision, but their uniforms bore no identifying marks, no flags or unit patches. Sarah stumbled as they pulled her from the aircraft, playing the role of someone weakened by captivity and transport. The facade wasn't difficult to maintain. 3 years of civilian life had softened some of her edges, and the emotional weight of the past 24 hours had drained her reserves. They processed her in a sterile intake facility that looked more like a medical clinic than a military detention center. Biometric scans, blood samples, psychological evaluation questionnaires designed to identify weaknesses and leverage points. Sarah answered honestly where she could, lied strategically where she had to. The intake officer was a woman in her 50s with the kind of professional demeanor that came from processing human assets like inventory. Elena Reeves, she read from a tablet. Captured during Operation Nightfall in Romania. Held for 14 months by foreign intelligence before escape and recapture. Interesting skill set. Combat medicine, explosives, psychological operations. Sarah remained silent, letting her manufactured history speak for itself. The woman looked up from the tablet. You're here because someone thinks you might be useful. Whether that proves true depends entirely on your attitude and cooperation. I understand, Sarah replied, injecting just enough defiance to seem authentic. The woman smiled coldly. No, you don't. But you will. The holding cell was sparse but comfortable. A bed with clean sheets, a small table, basic toiletries. More like a budget hotel room than a prison. Sarah understood the psychology behind it. Comfort was a tool, a way of making captivity feel like refuge. They would let her rest, recover, lower her guard. Then they would begin the real work of breaking her down and building her back up in their image. She had been in the cell for perhaps 2 hours when the door opened again. A man entered, tall and lean with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to controlling situations through presence alone. Elena Reeves, he said, settling into the chair across from her bed. I'm Dr. Harrison. I'll be overseeing your evaluation and potential integration into our program. Sarah studied him carefully. He looked like a university professor, the kind of man who might lecture on philosophy or political science. But there was something underneath the academic facade, a hardness that spoke of decisions made in shadows and lives spent in service to causes that existed beyond public scrutiny. You're wondering what this place is, Dr. Harrison continued. What we do here. Whether you're going to live or die based on what happens in the next few days. All valid concerns. Sarah decided to test the waters. I'm wondering why you didn't just kill me when you had the chance. Dr. Harrison laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor. Because killing talented people is wasteful. And because there are things worse than death for those who refuse to see reason. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me about Echo Team. Sarah's blood froze, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Dr. Harrison produced a tablet and swiped through several photographs. Her former teammates stared back at her, the images clearly recent. Marcus in surgical scrubs, Elena in a nurse's uniform, David in maintenance coveralls. All of them alive. All of them trapped. Of course you do, Dr. Harrison said quietly. Just as they know about you. The question is whether this reunion will be a celebration or a wake. Sarah's hands trembled despite her efforts to remain composed. What do you want from me? The same thing we wanted from them, Dr. Harrison replied. Service. Loyalty. The understanding that some causes transcend individual conscience. Your friends have learned these lessons well. They've become quite useful. Sarah thought about Blake's broken expression in the hospital basement, the way he had spoken about family and shadows and survival. What did you do to them? We offered them purpose, Dr. Harrison said. A chance to serve something greater than themselves. Some adapted more easily than others. Blake, for instance, required more intensive conditioning. But eventually, even he came to understand his role. The casual way he spoke about psychological torture made Sarah's stomach turn. And if I refuse? Dr. Harrison's smile disappeared entirely. Then you'll join the others who couldn't see reason. They're buried in unmarked graves scattered across 3 states. Their families still believe they died in the line of duty, heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. A noble fiction, don't you think? Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. When do I meet my team? Soon, Dr. Harrison promised. But first, you need to demonstrate that you understand the situation. Tomorrow you'll begin orientation. Physical conditioning, psychological evaluation, tactical assessment. If you prove adaptable, you'll be granted increasing levels of access and responsibility. If not, he left the threat hanging in the air between them. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand. Good, Dr. Harrison said, rising from his chair. Rest well, Elena. Tomorrow your new life begins. After he left, Sarah lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this facility, her teammates were living lies that had been forced upon them. Somewhere in the Virginia mountains, people were being trained to kill in service of causes they might never fully understand. And somewhere in the darkness beyond these walls, General Lawson and her team were waiting for intelligence that might never come. Sarah closed her eyes and began to plan. The orientation process began at dawn with a physical fitness assessment that pushed her to the limits of her current conditioning. They measured everything: reaction time, endurance, pain tolerance, recovery rate. The instructors were professional but impersonal, treating her like a piece of equipment being evaluated for potential purchase. Sarah performed well enough to seem capable without appearing to be at full strength. The psychological evaluation was more complex, a series of tests and interviews designed to map her mental landscape and identify pressure points. Dr. Harrison observed from behind one-way glass while a younger psychologist asked questions about loyalty, family, moral flexibility, and personal breaking points. Sarah answered truthfully where possible, understanding that lies would be detected and used against her later. The sessions revealed more about her captors than they probably intended. This was an organization that had studied human psychology extensively, that understood how to identify, isolate, and reprogram individuals with specific skill sets. They weren't just training killers. They were manufacturing loyal servants who believed in their missions. On the 3rd day, Sarah was moved to a different section of the facility. The corridors here were warmer, more comfortable, designed to feel like a workplace rather than a prison. She passed other residents, men and women who moved with military precision but avoided eye contact. Some bore the subtle signs of long-term psychological conditioning. The thousand-yard stare, the careful control of emotional expression, the way they held themselves as if constantly ready for inspection or combat. And then she saw him. Marcus Chin sat at a desk in what appeared to be a medical research laboratory, wearing a white coat and reviewing patient files. Her former squad leader looked older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she fought to keep walking, to maintain the facade of a new recruit being given a facility tour. Marcus looked up as she passed the laboratory window. Their eyes met for perhaps 2 seconds. Sarah saw recognition flicker across his features, followed immediately by something that looked like terror. He glanced quickly around the laboratory, then back at her, and gave the slightest shake of his head. A warning. Sarah understood. He was telling her to stay away, to not acknowledge their connection. The tour guide, a cheerful woman who might have been leading visitors through a corporate headquarters, continued her rehearsed presentation about the facility's medical research capabilities. Sarah nodded and asked appropriate questions while her mind raced with the implications of what she had witnessed. Marcus was alive. He was working under an assumed identity, and he was terrified of what might happen if their connection was discovered. That evening, during what the staff called social hour, Sarah found herself in a common area with a dozen other residents. They clustered in small groups, talking quietly about work assignments, training schedules, and weekend privileges. The conversation was superficial, carefully neutral, the kind of talk that revealed nothing important about anyone involved. Sarah recognized the pattern from military psychological operations courses. These people had been conditioned to avoid meaningful personal connections, to treat each other as colleagues rather than friends. Emotional attachment was a liability that could be exploited by enemies or used to justify defection. A woman approached Sarah's table, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Her voice carried a slight accent, Spanish or perhaps Portuguese. Sarah nodded. "Of course." The woman settled into the chair across from her. "I'm Linda," she said. "Linda Vale." Sarah nearly choked on her own coffee. Elena Vasquez, her former communications specialist, was sitting 3 feet away, using the cover identity that General Lawson had shown her in the Pentagon briefing files. Elena looked different. Her hair was shorter, lighter, and her face had the kind of sharp angles that came from stress and weight loss. But her eyes were the same, intelligent and watchful, missing nothing. "You're the new one," Elena continued. "Elena Reeves, right? From the Romanian operation." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Elena leaned forward slightly. "Word of advice. Keep your head down, do what they ask, and don't get attached to anyone here. People come and go quickly in this business." The warning was clear, delivered in the same neutral tone as everything else in this place. But underneath the words, Sarah caught something else. Elena was trying to protect her, trying to warn her away from whatever fate awaited those who caused problems or failed to adapt. Over the following days, Sarah began to understand the scope of the operation. The facility housed approximately 40 residents at any given time, a mix of former military personnel, intelligence operatives, and highly skilled civilians who had been recruited or coerced into service. They were organized into teams based on specialization: medical operations, cyber warfare, wet work, psychological operations. Each team operated independently, with members rotating in and out on missions that could last weeks or months. The facility itself was a combination training center, medical research laboratory, and psychological conditioning institute. Residents underwent constant evaluation and adjustment, their personalities and moral boundaries carefully sculpted to serve the organization's needs. Those who proved most adaptable rose through informal hierarchies, gaining access to better quarters, more interesting assignments, and limited freedoms. Those who resisted or showed signs of instability simply disappeared. Sarah learned this from careful observation and cautious conversations with other residents. Direct questions were discouraged, and anyone who showed too much curiosity about the organization's structure or leadership found themselves subjected to additional conditioning sessions with Dr. Harrison and his team. During her second week at the facility, Sarah was assigned to the Medical Operations Unit. Her cover story as Elena Reeves included extensive combat medical training, making her a natural fit for missions that required both healing and killing skills. The unit leader was Dr. Michael Chong, the identity that Marcus Chun had assumed. Working alongside her former squad leader required immense self-control. Sarah had to treat him as a stranger, follow his orders without question, and suppress every instinct to reach out to the man who had saved her life multiple times in combat zones around the world. Marcus had adapted to his role with disturbing thoroughness. He ran the medical unit with efficient precision, assigning residents to training exercises and mission preparations with the detached professionalism of a hospital administrator. His personality had been flattened, stripped of the warmth and dry humor that Sarah remembered from their time together in Echo Team. But occasionally, when he thought no one was looking, Sarah caught glimpses of the man underneath the conditioning. A flicker of pain when discussing experimental procedures. A moment of hesitation before ordering a particularly brutal training exercise. The careful way he avoided physical contact with other residents, as if human touch might awaken something he had been forced to bury. The breakthrough came during a simulated medical emergency training session. Sarah and 3 other residents were tasked with treating multiple trauma patients while under enemy fire. The scenario was designed to test their ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure, to separate emotional responses from tactical necessities. Marcus observed from the control room, speaking into a microphone that projected his voice across the training floor. "Patient 3 is hemorrhaging faster than you can control," he announced clinically. "You have 30 seconds to decide whether to continue treatment or move to the next casualty." Sarah looked down at the mannequin beneath her hands, its synthetic blood staining her gloves red. In the controlled environment of the training exercise, it was easy to make the rational choice. Triage demanded that resources be allocated where they could save the most lives. But something in Marcus's voice, a barely perceptible tremor, told her this wasn't just about medical training. This was about conditioning them to make impossible choices, to value mission success over individual lives. She continued working on patient 3, using techniques Marcus had taught her years ago to stabilize traumatic injuries under combat conditions. The timer ran out. The exercise was declared a failure. Marcus's voice over the intercom was emotionless. "Dr. Reeves, report to my office for debriefing." The office was small and sterile, decorated with medical textbooks and professional certifications that belonged to the fictional Dr. Michael Chong. Marcus closed the door behind them and activated a white noise generator that would mask their conversation from surveillance equipment. For a long moment, they stood in silence, 2 ghosts staring at each other across an impossible gulf. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah. This place breaks people. It's breaking me." Sarah's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "We're going to get you out," she said. "All of you. There's a team on the outside." Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. They don't just control our actions. They control our thoughts, our reactions, our ability to resist. I've done things. We've all done things." Sarah reached out and touched his arm. "You're still you. You're still the man who taught me field surgery, who carried David out of that minefield in Afghanistan." Marcus pulled away as if her touch burned. "That man died in Syria. What's left is just muscle memory and conditioning." Sarah refused to accept that. "Then help me save what's left. Help me get Elena and David and whoever else is still alive." Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "There's a mission coming up," he finally said. "High-value target, domestic operation. They're planning to use the medical team as cover for an assassination. A senator who's been asking uncomfortable questions about defense contractor oversight." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "When?" 3 days. Marcus looked up at her, and for a moment, she saw a flash of the man she remembered. "If you're going to do something, if your people on the outside are real, it has to be before then. Because after that mission, there won't be anything left of any of us worth saving." The next 72 hours passed like a countdown to detonation. Sarah maintained her cover, attended training sessions, participated in mission planning meetings where they discussed the assassination of Senator Patricia Mills with the clinical detachment of surgeons planning an operation. The target was a 3-term legislator who chaired the Senate Subcommittee on Defense Appropriations. According to the briefing materials, Senator Mills had been investigating irregularities in biological weapons research funding, tracing money that led uncomfortably close to the organization that held Sarah and her teammates. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dr. Michael Chang's medical team would be providing health screenings at a charity fundraiser that Senator Mills was scheduled to attend. During the routine blood pressure check, she would be injected with a modified version of the same neurotoxin that had nearly killed the general at Riverside Union Medical Center. Death would appear to be from natural causes, a sudden cardiac event that struck down an otherwise healthy woman in her 60s. Marcus had been chosen to administer the injection personally. Sarah watched him during the final briefing, saw the way he held himself rigid and controlled while Dr. Harrison explained the tactical importance of eliminating threats to their operations security. She understood now why Blake had been so broken during their confrontation in the hospital basement. This wasn't just about killing people. It was about turning them into weapons against everything they had once sworn to protect. That night, Sarah activated the emergency beacon hidden beneath her skin. The signal was designed to reach General Lawson's team within 6 hours, triggering the extraction and strike operation they had planned. But 6 hours might be too late. The assassination was scheduled for the following evening, and Sarah had no way of knowing if her teammates could be saved or if they were already too far gone to bring back. She lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the facility around her. Footsteps in corridors, the hum of ventilation systems, the distant murmur of voices from the common areas where other residents gathered to maintain the pretense of normal social interaction. Somewhere in this maze of rooms and laboratories, Elena and David were sleeping in beds like hers, possibly dreaming of lives they could no longer remember or homes they could never return to. Somewhere in this facility, Dr. Harrison and his staff were preparing to send her former squad leader out to commit murder in service of an organization that had already killed them all once. Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes and tried to prepare for whatever dawn would bring.